Okay, let's go ahead and get started because we do have a lot to cover today. I want to say, hey, congratulations to all of you who participated in the All-DAG Business Plan competition. It was really cool to see some of your faces in there. It was a fun 2 days. The competition went very, very well. I have to say kudos to Teresa Welburn for pivoting on the fly and making it virtual, and it all worked out really well. So that was cool. And I also want to say thank you to all of you for being flexible with me. I had had it on my calendar as Wednesday, Thursday, and then all of a sudden I realized, no, it was Tuesday, Wednesday. So thank you for being flexible with me and switching out days and us having class today instead of Tuesday. I truly appreciate that. And as we were talking about, if you were listening, let me let Seth in. As we were talking about, if you were listening, a couple of things about the assignment. So I moved the due date of the assignment to Tuesday. So you can email it to me by Tuesday. And there is a formula in there that is wrong. It's just missing one of the cells for addition. If you go in and you start filling out the Excel spreadsheet for the financial assignment and you notice that that formula is wrong, don't worry about it. That's my formula and I can correct that easily. I'm not worried about that. What I want to know is that you guys knew where to input everything into the sheets, okay? So don't worry, just complete them and send it to me by Tuesday. Also, before your class starts Tuesday, email it to me. Also on Tuesday, you will have your third exam for the semester, and it will cover all of the information about financials. You guys will have your Zoom videos that you can go back and review, and we'll have a good discussion today that's going to have a lot of important information in it. You have your PowerPoints, you've read the chapters, and then I will also go post an exam review for you, just like my summary of the chapters and what I want you to know out of there, okay? And that exam will be on Tuesday, and it will be a normal exam on Blackboard, just like the others that you've had. I will say that well, let me start with this. I'm going to have all of your grades for this semester input by next Wednesday night. So next Wednesday night, I'll have everything in. And you'll be able to look at your grades at that point and decide if you want to take your grade that you've earned in the class or if you would like to choose the pass-fail option. I will default to you're going to take the grade you've earned in the class unless you contact me on either next Thursday or Friday and tell me that you want to choose the pass-fail option. But once you choose, that's it. You can't go back. Okay, so any questions about that? Okay, good. And I'll send an email outlining everything for you so y'all can go back and read it, and hopefully there won't be any questions. As far as exams go, in your grade, remember that there are 4 exams offered this semester. The top 3 count. So next Tuesday is going to be your 3rd exam. If you have taken all 3 exams and you are happy with your grade next Wednesday night, once I get them all posted, then the final is optional for you. The final exam will not hurt your grade if you have taken all 3 exams. And the reason for that is we only count the top 3 scores. So if you go into the final and you make higher on the final than one of your previous 3 test scores, then I'll just drop the lowest one and your grade in the class will go up. However, if you come in and you take the final, which will be comprehensive, and you make lower on it than you made on either of your other 3 exams, then we just drop the final. So it cannot hurt your grade. Is that clear for everybody? Good, but if you did miss one of the exams, you will need to take the final because it's going to be one of your 3. All good? Good. Okay. So is everybody still healthy? Everybody's still doing great? Families are still great? All good? Okay, good. I'm so glad to hear that. What I want to do today is we're going to get into a good discussion about financial statements. And I'm not going to lie and say like this is going to be the most interesting lecture that I do ever. As a matter of fact, it's probably like my least favorite. But I do know that it is one of the most important. So what we'll do today is I'm going to go through a lot. You guys are welcome to tune in and listen as I go and interrupt me and ask questions if you like as we talk about it. Or you're welcome to come back and watch the Zoom video after I get it posted later. That's completely up to you. But I'm going to give you a lot of information today in class about financial statements, and a lot of this will be on the exam, okay? All right. When I talk about financials, like I tell you, it's not my favorite subject. It's really not, but it is the most important. And I can tell you that 90% of people in the world have no idea how to truly read and interpret financial statements. They have no idea. And that's a problem because that 90% includes entrepreneurs as well. But I can tell you that if you learn the basics of your financial statements and how to read the story that they tell you, that it will position you further ahead than other entrepreneurs and lots of other people that you work with within your organization. Because if you understand the dynamics of how the story that financial statements tell, then you will better understand the big picture of why companies and corporations make the decisions that they do. It'll also help you to better contribute and to better help organizations if you understand where they need help within those financial statements. Now remember, most people don't go into business just for the money. Money is the great performance measure that tells us how we're doing. And we like to do really well, and we would like to be rewarded for that. You all like to be rewarded with really good grades for doing well in class. Entrepreneurs like to be rewarded with a lot of money for doing really well in business. But most of the time for successful entrepreneurs, it's not the motivator. It is strictly the performance measure and the bonus that we get. But we still want to be able to control that bonus. So when we talk about financial statements, there's two things here. You want to be able to write your story so that the story of your life, your business, looks like you want it to look and plays out the way that you want it to play out. So you want to be able to write it, but you also need to be able to read it so that you can judge, is everything happening the way that I planned for it to happen? Am I doing as well as I wanted to do? Or am I not doing as well as I wanted to do? And if I'm not, what do I need to change? And this is why we really, really need to understand financial statements. So what we'll do is I'll start. Let me do the share screen here with you and get to the whiteboard. Make sure you can you all see that? You see me right on the pen? Good? Okay. As long as we can see that, then we'll be good to go. Remember I told you that we're going to talk about financial statements in terms of a story, and we're going to, I'm trying to get my screen so I can see all of y'all. Give me 1 second. Make sure I've got it up. There we go. So we're going to talk about financial statements in the form of a story, and it's houses, and there's characters that live in these houses. In the first house, and I can't draw it, y'all already know that, so you are welcome to make fun of me. The first house that we're going to talk about here is the startup house. This is our beginner house. Everybody needs a little starter, right? So this is our startup house, and these are where we're going to put all of our startup costs. Now, startup costs are everything that you have to spend money on prior to opening your business. So you can think about this line as like this is a timeline, and this timeline is when you actually open for business. Prior to opening, you're going to have to spend money on several things. If you look inside the PowerPoints that I've posted for you, I've given you examples and templates of what a startup cost form would look like and all of the other financial statements. But here, some of the things you may have to spend money on prior to opening are, you're probably going to have to spend some money on some licenses and fees, business license, maybe pay attorney fees, accounting fees, some software fees to get your QuickBooks going. You have to pay that. It's possible you may have to pay some rent before you open. If you're developing an online business, maybe you've got to pay for app development, or you've got to pay for website development. You're definitely going to have to pay for some kind of marketing before you open. If not, the day you open the door, no one will know you exist. So you're going to have to get the word out that you're coming and that you're going to open. And it's possible, you know, you may have to pay some payroll before you open. If you're bringing on employees, you need to have those employees in place, and you need to have them trained prior to opening, because when you open the door, they need to be ready to go. The things that are included on your startup costs form and in the startup cost house vary. And these vary greatly depending on the kind of business that you're going to open. And if you think about it, you can think like, gosh, if somebody's going to open a construction company, their startup costs are going to look way different than somebody who opens a bicycle shop. They're going to look even way different than someone who's opening a professional coaching service. So those are just three of the businesses that I have had or do have. And startup costs for all of those were extremely different. It's important that you keep track of this and that you know the total of what your startup costs are going to be. And we'll talk about that a little later as to why it's important, because you need to know where that money's going to come from, and you need to know exactly how much you're going to need. Okay, any questions so far? I've been teaching all day, so my throat's dry. All right, so let's say we've got our startup costs, we've gotten to this timeline, and now it's time to open the door. After we open our business, then we will start looking at different financial statements to be able to tell our story and read our story. And the first house we're going to talk about and look at is the income statement house. So here's the income statement. And some of these characters and some of these houses have nicknames, and they go by different names. You need to know their names and nicknames because we can talk about them interchangeably, and this will happen a lot. So this is either an income statement, also known as a P&L, whereas the P&L stands for profit and loss. And inside this house, we have a cast of characters. The first character that we're going to talk about is gross sales. Gross sales is exactly what it sounds like. It is the total dollar amount of sales that you made within a certain time period. And that time period is anything that you designate. Maybe it's like you want to know how much sales you did today. Maybe you want to know how much you did in sales for this week, or the month of January, or the year of 2012. You designate that time period, and this will tell you what gross sales were. It's going to be a dollar figure. The next character that lives in this house is the cost of goods sold. Cost of goods sold is how much it costs you to produce 1 unit of whatever it was you sold. 1 unit. And we'll talk about that more in just a little bit. Gross sales minus your cost of goods sold is going to give you your gross profit. Now, just so you know, cost of goods sold has a nickname too. Cost of goods sold is also known as variable costs. So let's talk about an example real quick and get into this. Let's just say we decided that we're going to sell rocking chairs. We're going to build rocking chairs and sell them. So we went to Home Depot and we bought wood and nails and stain, and we're going to build these rocking chairs. And when we build these rocking chairs, we're going to sell them for $50 each. Now, if we sit down and look at how much it cost us to build each rocking chair, we determined that it was going to cost us $25 to build each one. So if we sell them, this is going to be retail, is what you sell it for. If we sell it for that, our cost is what we have to pay for it, or our cost of goods sold here. Those are two different things. We sell it for $50. It costs us $25 to produce it. Our gross profit at this point is how much? Somebody chime in. Somebody unmute. Who can do math? Don't make me call on you, Gavin.
25.
Oh, that was Gabby. Thank you. All right, gross profit is $25. Now, here's an interesting thing. This is where a lot of people get really confused. Well, when you went to Home Depot, you actually bought $300 worth of wood, nails, and stain. And a lot of people will get confused because they bought $300 worth of supplies, and they'll want to put $300 right here for cost of goods sold, but that is not correct. The only thing that you record in cost of goods sold is the actual cost for what you sold, cost of goods sold. It is not the 300. I'll show you later where that goes, but it doesn't go here. So let's just say if we spent $300 and it cost $25 each to build the rocking chairs, 25 into 300, how many rocking chairs could we build? How many could we build? How many times is 25 going to 300?
12.
12, thank you. So we actually have 12 rocking chairs. This is if we sold one. What if we sold 4 rocking chairs? If we sold 4, our gross sales would be $200, 50 times 4. What would our cost of goods sold be if we sold 4? I'm waiting.
100.
Thank you, Tom. $100. So you can see here, we still haven't put the 300. The reason that cost of goods sold is called variable cost is because it varies with how much you sell. And it's really important to remember. So cost of goods sold will go up the more you sell. The less you sell, cost of goods sold will go down. Does that make sense for everybody? Good. Okay. But this is not the end of it. Not at all. So here, this gets us to gross profit. But now there are some other things that we're going to have to pay for and some other characters who live on the income statement. So we've got gross profit. Now we have to subtract out some other things. We have to subtract out whatever we pay for every month. Let's just say we're talking about a month. Maybe it's rent. We've got to pay for utilities. Perhaps we pay payroll for sure. Payroll, insurance costs, marketing. And we subtract, and there could be a number of these, and these are going to change depending on the type of business that you have. But then we subtract all of these out, and let's just make up something that was 5, 3, 2, 2, and 3. So we had $25. We subtract out the total of these. So that is 5, 10, 15. That means we had $10, and because this number is positive, that is a profit. Had this number been negative, it would have been a loss. Hence, that's why this is called the P&L. These expenses have lots of names, and people talk about them a lot of ways. Some people call these operating expenses. Some people call these overhead. And these are also known as fixed costs. All of those mean the same thing and are used interchangeably. The reason that these are called fixed costs is because they do not vary based on the amount of sales that you make. Now, is it possible that your utilities vary in dollar amount that you pay for them every month? Yes, but that's going to be based upon the temperature outside, not on how much you do in sales. Your rent is not going to change based on how much you do in sales. So does that make sense as to why we have fixed and variable? Okay, all depends on what we do in sales. Everybody with me so far? Good. Oop, something else in. All right, so this is our income statement. Now, this one's really important to watch, and this one tells a great story for us. But just to look at a single income statement by itself really means nothing. It means nothing until we have something to compare it to. And there's a number of things that we could compare this to. Perhaps we have pulled industry averages. So we've gone on the databases that I've told you about. We've gone to IBIS World. And perhaps we've pulled some industry standards for the rocking chair industry. And we know typically what they do in sales. We know what kind of market share they have. We know what their normal markup is. We know lots of things about them. So we can compare to industry standards and see how we're doing. We can also compare these. If we start looking at these, we compare one month to the next. The way that most businesses look at their income statement and the way that they usually start to read their story is they'll print an income statement for every month. So we'll look at January, we'll look at February, we'll look at March, and then we can plot this out. So if this is time and these are months, March, April, May, June, July, and this is dollar figures, we can start to plot both gross sales or gross profit. So let's just say we're going to plot gross sales first. We can plot gross sales, and let's get this out here. So that was August all the way to December. If I'm going to plot gross sales for Velocity, for the bicycle shop inside a college town, this is what it would look like. We would have like a pretty good bump in January. It would drop in February. March might come back up. We have a okay summer. August would be like this. Then we'd come down and we'd have a little bump in December. And that's what a true sales flow looks like for the bicycle, a local bicycle shop in Tuscaloosa. Now, when I look at this, this tells me a story. This tells me what I need to do to prepare for the year in a lot of different ways. If I know that's my sales, then what I know is if I've got a huge bump right here in August, that I need to plan for that. And back here in June, I need to order a lot of inventory and have it ready in August for the big bump. Because there's nothing worse than going into a store and trying to buy something and them telling you they're sold out, right? It makes both mad. It makes the person who's needing to sell something mad because they just lost out on a sale. And it's going to make you mad because you were expecting to come get something. But if you don't read the story, you wouldn't know that. The other part of this tells me is a lot of people intuitively would say, oh, you're a bicycle shop, you're going to have a big Christmas. But that's not true. So if I didn't read my real story and I just went with whatever people are saying they think is true, I would have ordered a lot of inventory and had a lot of employees on hand, and I would have lost a lot of money. Because what happens at Christmas is Santa buys bicycles for kids, but Santa doesn't buy high-end bicycles from a bike shop for their kids. They go to Academy and Walmart and Target and get cheaper bikes for their kids. So while we get an okay Christmas, we don't get a big one, not like you'd think. But once again, I've got to read my story and know how my story reads so that I can manipulate a lot of different things. As we look at this, there are some ratios that help us read our story better. And you're going to need to look at some of these ratios and understand them. The first one we would look at would be our gross profit. And you see it shows up over here. It has some other names too. It can be called net sales. That's one of its nicknames. But I'm pretty sure I put all of those nicknames in the PowerPoints for you. And gross profit is just equal to gross sales minus cost of goods sold. It can also be shown as a percentage. So we can also look at the gross profit percent. So that's one of our first ones that we look at. And the reason that we look at this is we need to look at this in conjunction with something else, something called our markup percentage. And your markup percentage is equal to your selling price or retail minus your cost to produce divided by your cost to produce. This is pretty important to know. So let's talk about why. True story. When right before I opened Villa City Bicycle Shop, there was one bicycle shop in town, Cycle Path, and they'd been around forever and ever. But for some reason, they were doing really poorly. You would walk in and like they didn't have very much inventory. The people who were working there would say, no, like we can't order anything. We've been cut off from our vendors, like our credit's done. We don't really know what's going on. They had an out-of-town owner, and they had some really, really great guys working inside the store who knew a lot about bicycles. But something was wrong, and I didn't know what was wrong. So before I opened Villa City, I wanted to go try to diagnose what was happening with Cycle Path to make sure that it wasn't a market demand issue. So being the nerd that I am, I went and started hanging out in the bike shop. So I hung out in there and realized that like they were doing great in sales. If you looked at this number as gross sales, they were doing fantastic. Like sales were going, oops, that was the eraser. Sales were going way up. It was not a problem with sales. They were busy. So I was like, geez, what is going on? So I just kept watching, and I really couldn't diagnose for a little bit kind of what was going on with them until I decided I wanted to order a bike. And there was an Eddie Merckx frame that I was dying to have. If anybody knows Eddie Merckx, y'all can email me and get some bonus points so you can understand the kind of frame I wanted. But I was on Eddie Merckx carbon frame built up with Campy. So I went in and I told them, I'm like, hey, can you order this frame for me? I found that I want, and they're like, yeah. And the manager of the store said, yes, I can order for that for you. I'll sell it to you at 10% above cost. And when he said that, it was like, mic drop. I know what's wrong. Somebody tell me what was wrong.
Isn't he like saying that he's trying to like gain a profit off of you? I don't know, just like the way he's saying that is just not really something
Well, it's not professional for sure.
Yeah.
But because he's not the owner. But he said he was going to sell it to me at 10% above cost.
He's also not getting his margins, his payback.
Keep going.
Like he's not making enough profit to like support the business itself by getting margins that low.
That's exactly what the problem was. And when he told me that, I knew. I was like, huh. I was like, you guys are experts on bicycles, but they belong to the 90% of people who don't know how to read financial statements. What he was saying was his markup percent was going to be 10% more than what they actually paid. So let's go back and look at this example about rocking chairs. If it costs me $25 to make a rocking chair, and I tell you I'm going to sell it for 10% above that, that's going to make my selling price, I'm just going to go with a little bit of math. Let's just say it makes it $27.50 because I'm not going to go work it out. I'm selling it for $27.50, but it costs me $25 to make. My gross profit is $2.50. Is that anywhere close to enough profit to pay operating expenses or overhead? No. And the manager of the store was incentivized by sales going up. So he was only looking at that number and nothing below it, because that's where his bonus came from. I don't blame him, right? Except that he lost his job because the store closed. So that's the only thing he was looking at. He had no idea how to read the rest of the story. And ultimately, Cycle Path, I didn't put them out of business. They put themselves out of business and went bankrupt because of it. It is important that you understand markup percentage. So if you know how much it's going to cost you to produce one item, and you need to know that, you've got to know, then you need to have a really good guess of what your operating expenses are going to be so that you can calculate what you need your markup percent to be so that you can survive. Setting a retail price for any object is very, very scientific. It's very scientific. And if you had stayed in class, we would have had a project where you would have had to have figured this out about something. But instead, y'all got a gimme and you're welcome for the Excel spreadsheet that you got for your final assignment. I know it's a gimme and you're welcome. So if you'd stayed in class, though, we would have worked this out. Because especially in the college realm, for some reason, I hear people say, like, if we're going to say sell the rocking chair, they're going to say, well, I'm going to sell it for $30. I'm going to say, why did you pick $30? You say, well, because that makes me cheaper than everybody else. And I thought that's what people would pay. That's the wrong answer every time, every time. And if that's your answer, and if that's the way you come up with your retail price for whatever it is that you sell, then you're going to fall victim to the psychopath syndrome. And I just made that up. I'm going to tell them, that's a new one, the psychopath syndrome. And you'll go out of business because you will not have enough gross profit to cover all of your operating expenses. Everybody with me? So it's important to be able to read the story and to know.
I've got a question.
Sure. Who are we talking to? Hey.
Tyler.
Yeah.
So when you're calculating cost to produce, are you calculating the labor and material that it takes to create that product, or are you just counting the material?
Just the material.
Okay.
Labor goes in payroll.
Gotcha.
To answer your question, though, in construction, if you're doing takeoffs for a job, you have to calculate labor per job, and that gets into some other things, Tyler, that we could talk about.
Yeah, that's the only thing that mixes me up.
Yeah. And remember, and all of you remember this too, that Management 386 is like a 50,000 foot level class where I tell you a lot about a little. I mean, a little about a lot. I got that backwards. I tell you a little about a lot. If you were actually going to come in and start doing your financial statements, I'm giving you like the rough story here. There's still a lot more detail that goes into it, and every business is different. So I know what Tyler's talking about with construction, and it would be just a little bit different for each job for you. Okay. All right. So when we start talking about markup percent, to get back to that though, it's important that you know what your markup percent is and what you need to maintain so you can stay in business. Now, most businesses don't change their sell price on an ongoing basis and keep going. Most of the time, you'll change your prices. You'll see, oh, it's that annual increase. You get the annual increase in your rent, or the new Air Jordans that came out this year more expensive than the ones from last year. It's usually like an annual increase. However, there is one industry out there that has perfected markup percent, and they know exactly what markup percent they need to be successful and profitable. And it changes. They change it. It fluctuates all the time. And we put up with it and we let them do it. Anybody think of what that industry is? We pay for this all the time.
Oil?
Keep going with it. Yeah.
Gas?
Gas. This is why we see our gas prices fluctuate all the time. The petroleum industry has figured out what they need for their market percent to be so that they can be profitable. And as the price of oil changes per barrel, and you'll hear this on the news, as it changes, you're going to see the price of gas change because they've perfected the art of the market percent. Perfected it. And it is really a shame right now that gas is as cheap as it is because we can't freaking go anywhere. That's a shame. I know. We can't even like go take advantage of it, can we? Unless we just want to drive around and not go anywhere, but just go. So does everybody understand here what we're talking about? Following me? Awesome. Okay. Well, we got lots to go, so let's keep going. Let's keep talking. Here, as you read in the book, you know that when you're keeping your books or preparing the financial statements, there's two ways that you can do bookkeeping. One was called the cash basis, and the other was called accrual. If you're operating on a cash basis, that means that you pay cash for everything you purchase, and everything that is purchased from you they pay cash to you every time. Now, do any of you do business like that right now? Always, exclusively? No, not unless you're a drug dealer. They're like the only people I could think of that might do that. But otherwise, we pay for things with credit cards, don't we? So you pay for something with a credit card and it is a delay. No cash actually exchanges hands. The cash doesn't come from you until you pay the credit card bill. And most of the time people buy their inventory on credit the same way. So that means that we are operating on an accrual basis. So that's an important thing for you to know, because what this means is I could have gone to Home Depot and bought all $300 worth of my inventory and paid for it with a credit card. No money has exchanged hands yet. Someone could have bought the rocking chair from me and used a credit card, and no one exchanged hands. So I could have gone and gotten the lumber, nails, the stain, built the rocking chair, someone bought the rocking chair from me. It could have gone through all of those stages and still no money exchanged hands yet. None. So that means that when you look at an income statement and all the characters that are in there and you get to the bottom and you see this number, that is not equivalent to the amount of money that you have in the bank or that you have in your hands from that month. Because there is no guarantee that money actually exchanged hands. Everybody follow me with that? Instead, that is why we introduce another house. And we'll come down here and introduce this. This is why we will talk about the cash flow house. This is where the Cash family lives. There's not many of them, but they're probably the most important house. And the first person who lives in this house is Mr. Cash in. And this is where we actually record cash that came into our hands. There's also Mrs. Cash out. Because as women, we always spend the money, don't we? So we subtract out all of the money that actually went out of the business. And what's left here is our cash on hand. It's a really important concept for you to understand, because if we get back up here and look at our chart and know, like I had really good sales in January that showed up on my income statement and showed a really good profit, but I might not actually get the cash from that until I settle out with my credit card and it is deposited in my bank till February. Here, I'll have a really good month in August, but I might not see that cash until September. There is typically always, when you're running an accrual basis business, a lag from the time sales happen till you actually collect the cash. And you're going to hear different things. Y'all watch Shark Tank, and you hear things like Mark Cuban will say, "When do you expect to hit break even?" Y'all heard that? So if we hear the term, "When do you expect to break even?" what that means is, at what point on your income statement is that number going to be equal to 0? Meaning that you're not losing money. So when will in other words, when will your sales be high enough that you have created enough sales to cover every expense that you have so that this hits 0 and then starts becoming positive? That is when you hit break even. Another term that you will hear them use is, when are you going to be, I'll put it here. When are you going to be cash flow positive? And that's another important one, because what that means is, if there's a lag in sales and when you actually collect cash, then it's going to be a little while before you have accumulated enough cash for this number to be positive all the time. Let's talk about why that's true. So when we come back up to the income statement here and we look at the fact that Mr. Overhead lives here, Mr. Overhead wants to get paid with cash every month, regardless of how much you do in sales. And the money that we pay Mr. Overhead with is called working capital. And we know that when any business opens in the beginning, that their sales are very low, and hopefully they continue to rise over time, right? So what that means is, while we're working our butts off trying to increase our sales and trying to get more and more and more, that means that there's got to be a stash of cash somewhere that you can pull from so that you can pay Mr. Overhead every month, because Mr. Overhead wants his money. It'd be awesome if employees sat around and said, oh no, I understand cash flow. Why don't you just pay me when you get cash flow positive? So that's not the way the world works, right? So you've got to have that money somewhere. So what that means is you're going to have been paying out. And let's just imagine you had a little savings account somewhere until you finally get to a point that sales are high enough that you can cover all of your expenses, you hit break even. And then after you hit break even on an ongoing basis, there's a little bit of a lag before you actually get cash. And when you actually get that cash, then we can start talking about you being cash flow positive. Everybody follow that? Did I go too fast? Has everybody got it? Now, this is important for investors. They want to know this. They want to know when you're going to hit break even and when you're going to start making a profit, because an investor is not going to get paid until you are making a profit. Investors who come in with equity financing are going to give you money in exchange for equity. No equity can be paid out until you're making a profit. So it's important that you know when you're going to hit break even. It's also important that you know when you're going to be cash flow positive, because that's going to be, we call it bleeding money. That's when the bleeding stops. And that's a really, really important and pivotal time in a business. So, all really important things for you to know. And we'll talk about these. Let's keep going with it. And come over and talk about the balance sheet. So the next house we're going to look at is our balance sheet. And Mr. Balance Sheet has two families who live in there. They coexist together. The first family is the asset family. Now, asset family's got two parts. It's got the current assets and the fixed assets. The current assets are defined by things that, are going to turn over in like 30 days or less. So this is like cash, inventory, accounts receivable. Here's where a little bit of interplay happens. I told you most of these characters live in their own house and they stay there, but sometimes there's a little bit of interplay. If we go here and look at cash on hand, the cash on hand that comes from our cash flow statement is going to be equal to the amount of cash that shows up in our current assets. It's the same number, okay? So as this changes, this will change. And this is something like some companies will settle out with their credit card companies every night, and we'll run a report and we'll get the deposit once a day from the credit card company. Some do it once a week, some do it once a month, right? So cash could exchange like that all the time. Sometimes people come in and pay with debit cards, and there's a little bit of a lag from the time that the bank actually deposits it into your account. So that cash on hand and cash in can change a lot. Same thing for cash out. The other thing here is like, okay, so let's say accounts receivable. Let's say we sold that $50 rocking chair to our customer and they paid for it with a credit card. Well, that $50 is sitting right there in accounts receivable until we settle up with the credit card company and the credit card company deposits that $50 into our account. So we'll say we've got $50 worth of accounts receivable sitting there. Now, inventory. Remember I told you we went to Home Depot and we bought $300 worth of inventory so that we could build 12 rocking chairs. A lot of people will get mixed up and they'll try to put the $300 over here on the income statement because cash actually $300 went out in cash. Let's just say we paid for it that way, okay? Let's just say it did. But we haven't actually sold those rocking chairs yet, so they don't show up on the income statement. They'll only show up on the income statement as each rocking chair is sold. That's it. Instead, we're going to go over here, and when we bought that original inventory, we had $300 worth of inventory, and we have 12 rocking chairs, and that's where it shows up. It is a current asset. As we sell them, we sold one. We've now got 11 rocking chairs. We sold it, and so we subtract that 25 out. It's $275 now in inventory. That $25 that we just took out of there is the $25 that is right there for cost of goods sold. Everybody follow that? Yeah? Okay. And it would just keep subtracting out. When the credit card company pays us the $50, then we're going to have cash in of $50. The accounts receivable is going to go to 0, and our cash is going to go up by 50. And that's kind of how they all, that's a very simplistic way of showing you how they all interchange and interplay. Did that confuse anybody? Are y'all able to stay with me? Okay. Awesome. So that is how our current assets works. Now our fixed assets is going to be something that doesn't turn over or flip in 30 days. It's going to be more of the big stuff. I like to call it the big stuff, the PP&E, like your plants. Let me make that a little cleaner. Plant, property, and equipment. Maybe it's your cars. Maybe it's all of the retail racks that you have inside your store that you display everything on. Maybe it's the actual building, it's real estate. This is the big stuff. And so we have our current assets, our fixed assets. We add the total of those, and that gives us our total assets. So our assets we can think of as these are the things that we own. We own that. That's ours. The next family inside the balance sheet is the liabilities. Liabilities is what we owe. In here, and it's divided into two little divisions as well. We have our short-term liabilities. Those are things that we're going to pay off pretty quickly. And then we have our long-term liabilities. Our short-term liabilities are usually like our accounts payable. Think of that as your credit card bill. If you've got a credit card bill, it's sitting there waiting to be paid. It's sitting in your accounts payable right now. So we have that. Long-term liability is normally loans. And these are usually bigger amounts and things that we pay over time. Think about a house payment, a car payment. These are our long-term loans. And these are debt financing. There's two types of financing, equity and debt. Your long-term loans here, and what's going to be on your liabilities is going to be a debt financing. So we're going to add the total of those for our total liabilities. Now, here's where the magic happens on the balance sheet, and this is like my favorite part. Total assets minus total liabilities gives you a wonderful number. That tells you how much you're worth. And that's what I want to know. I want to know my net worth. A nickname for this is owner's equity. Or my owner's equity. That's what I want to know. Now, I don't know why accountants come along and like they put arbitrary numbers in here to try to make this all balance out to make it zero. And anytime I've ever like sat down and really questioned an accountant as to like why do you really have to make that happen? They start explaining the procedure to me. I'm like, no, but you didn't tell me why. I really don't care about why. That right there is all I care about. That's what I care about. And when that number hits 1 million or above, you're classified as a millionaire. And that's how it happens. Doesn't mean you have $1 million in your pocket walking around. It took me a long time to convince my 11-year-old that that's not the case. People don't walk around. But when total assets minus total liabilities equals 1 million, you are a millionaire. Got it? Everybody with me? I know some of y'all are like, and then some of y'all are like, oh, I get it. I do. All right. So any questions so far about the financial statements, what they tell us and how they interplay? Not yet? Okay, let's go on and let's talk about the next thing that's super important. So what we've looked at here is startup costs, income statement, cash flow, and we've talked about the balance sheet. Let's talk about life cycles. And this is in your PowerPoint as well. The first one we're going to talk about is an industry life cycle. Why is that not writing? I don't know what happened. Industry life cycle. And this one is going to be your, why does it keep doing that? Business. That is so weird. I don't know what I did, y'all. Business life cycle. Now to look at them, they're going to look exactly the same. They're going to follow like any other biological life cycle. And that is exactly what a biological life cycle looks like. But there's a difference between the business and the industry. So let's talk about that for just a second. An industry, as if you could read that, it's pathetic. An industry is more of a conglomeration of a lot of businesses that operate within the same kind of framework. Like there's the food industry. And in the food industry, you could have the fast food industry, you could have the fine dining industry, you could have catering businesses. Those are all within the food industry. We have the construction industry, which could be broken down into commercial or home building, utility, all kinds of ways that you could break down the construction industry. There's the technology industry, which could be broken down into, are you creating hardware or software? There's lots of ways we could break it down. But all industries follow a particular life cycle. Whereas this is the birth of the industry. This is its growth. This is when it matures. This is shakeout. Now, let's talk about what that means. Do y'all remember a couple of years ago in Tuscaloosa, we had about a 6-month period there where like 6 or 7 pizza places opened. Do y'all remember that? It was like Heat Pizza opened, Post Office Pies, Little Italy, Pyros. Those are just 4 that I can remember, but it was like, it was crazy. We had like multiple pizza places open all at the same time. Well, what was happening was there were several entrepreneurs who were very aware, who realized that the market in Tuscaloosa was demanding a better place to get pizza. And so 6 or 7 entrepreneurs jumped into the industry at the same time and decided to open a pizza place. So here was the birth of this was where demand, like we want a pizza place, we want a pizza place. The first one opened, the second one opened, and then we saw fast growth where multiple pizza places opened. So birth, growth, and then what eventually happens is within the Tuscaloosa market, there's a finite amount of people who will actually spend money at pizza places. And once you maximize that within a market, you have hit market saturation. That means everybody in the market's being served. So your overall dollar sales won't go up anymore. It's saturated. And when that happens, if there are too many businesses that exist in that industry, that means that not all of them can get enough market share or enough sales to create enough gross profit to cover their operating expenses. So they can't bring in enough cash, so they will go out of business because they can't do anything to create more sales. Does that make sense? And when that happens, for the companies that have not planned, that have not done their due diligence and who don't expect this, those companies fall victim to the industry life cycle. And in shakeout is when the businesses who didn't plan for it close. It's kind of like Darwinism, the strong survive. So we'll be left with a few. It's starting to happen in the pizza industry, even before we left because of COVID. Little Italy has already closed. We saw Post Office Pies close. It closed for a landlord reason, but still it closed, which opened up that market share again. But we're starting to see the shakeout in the pizza place industry in Tuscaloosa. So does that all make sense for you? Well, it is important that you understand when you decide to open a business where it is in the industry life cycle so that you can plan for it. Is it going to be in the growth sector so that you're like early mover advantage? Or is it up here? Is it mature? And if it's mature, that's probably not a good thing, because that means there's not a lot of market share left for you to go around. And the only way for you to survive is to start stealing customers. And that's very expensive. So you've got to know where you fall. Let's look down here at the business life cycle. Now it looks the same and it kind of acts the same, but let's talk about this. This is your individual business. So when we start looking at your individual business, this time right here, and you can think about this line as the same line we drew, that is when you actually open for business, right? If we think about this as a timeline. And this is where your startup costs happen. So this is all the money you need prior to opening. This is when you're learning to do all of the due diligence that you've learned how to do in 386. So you've done all your due diligence, you're spending money here, you've developed your website, all this stuff. So we've got startups here. This is when we actually open. Sales are soft in the beginning, and we're going to see this is going to be our sales numbers. Sales are soft in the beginning. We're going to see a rapid growth in our sales, and then we're going to top out. We're going to saturate. We have to plan for this, because once we plan for this, we'll have a small drop and then we're going to level out. In here, it's important to know the money that you're going to need in each phase in the business life cycle. Here, obviously, you're going to need money for all of your startup costs. At this point, here in growth, you're going to need working capital, because you're going to need to try to maintain paying all of your expenses until your sales get high enough that you're break even and cash flow positive. So you're going to need some working capital. You're probably also going to need some growth money. And growth happens when, like, you get here, we start out with bootstrapping, but then eventually we need some more money to bring in, because maybe we need to buy, if we're a delivery business right now, maybe we need to buy more delivery trucks. And to keep up with demand, we need to grow. So we can get that from a few places. But it's important to understand how quickly it's going to take you to ramp up. How quick is this curve going to happen? And how much money are you going to need until we get here? And the reason that this is important is because this is going to determine the type of money you need, and the type of money you need will determine who you ask for the money. In this, and we're talking about sources of financing now. So here, with the startup costs, when you're in this phase of the business, you have no proven track record that your business is actually going to make any sales or that you can actually do it. You probably have no assets for collateral either. So there's two types of financing: debt, that's when you get a loan, and equity is when you bring in investors and they give you money in exchange for ownership. This point, it's really hard to bring in investors. You have no track record whatsoever. So what usually happens here is when you have to use your personal money to have a savings account so that you can open your own business. And you can also, at this point, this is where you'll tap into friends and family, because you're going to go need to find somebody who believes in you and trusts in you to give you money with no track record. So that's usually where this funding comes from in the beginning. This is the hardest place to fund money. I will tell you now, it's kind of like the black hole of entrepreneurship. But after we open and we have a little bit of a track record here, we've shown, oh, we're making some sales, we're making some sales. Now we've tapped out all of our money. Like we don't have anything to pay working capital. We don't have any more working capital. Maybe we need to get that. But we still don't have enough track record to go get a loan or a line of credit from a bank. This is normally where we will see angel investing come in. You've got enough track record to prove to them that you can do sales and that this business works, and you've done your homework well enough and done budget forecasting, which we'll talk about in just a second, well enough to convince them that the business is going to do what you say it's going to do, and they're going to give you some investment in exchange for ownership. And that's going to happen somewhere in this area. Once we keep going, once we get to the growth sector, growth can happen in several ways. Maybe we need assets. It's easier at this point because we've got more of a track record of sales, and we've probably got some other things that we own. It's probably easier at this point to go get debt, to get a loan from a bank so that you can grow. Another way that you can get money at this point is through venture capitalists. Venture capitalists are going to give you a lot more money than angels, but they're also going to need to see a lot more track record from you before they will ever jump in and give you any funding. So this is why your story is really important and understanding your financial statements. First of all, you need to know how much money you need, why you've got to do your startup costs. You're going to need to know, by doing some forecasting, how long is it going to take you till you hit break even and until you get to cash flow positive, because you're going to need to know that so that you can determine how much working capital you're going to need to have in your business to stay afloat. And then once you hit here, if you want to do anything more than top out, if you want to, then you've got to start to look at some type of growth strategy or scale your business. And you need to know what that plan is going to be and how much money you're going to need so that you can go to either venture capitalists or to banks or credit unions, whatever, to try to get a loan for assets. So this is all really important to help you understand how the whole process works. Clear as mud? Okay, I want to come back over here and do one more thing for you and show you something. Now, when we start talking about forecasting and budgeting, it's not as hard as it sounds. It's really not. What's going to happen is you're going to make a forecasted budget. And really what it looks like is an income statement for your first year in business, and you're going to estimate what January, February, March, April, May is going to look like. And you're going to do that based on some educated guesses. Your educated guesses are going to come from your research on industry averages, other businesses like yours, and you're going to estimate, like, what is my sales going to look like for my first year? How long is it going to take me to build up to get to the market share that I want? Because nobody gets it immediately. And like I said, we make some really good educated guesses. Nobody really knows 100% when you're going to hit those points, but you should have some really good guesses. You can do that for year one. And normally when you start to get investment, they're going to want to see your 5-year projected budgets. What are your milestones? When do you think you're going to hit this? Where are you going to do that? And then they're also going to want to know, like, okay, well, when we get to the top of the life cycle there, what are your plans to scale your business? Or are we just going to top out and that's it? So you need to budget here and understand projected sales based on industry averages, other people like you, how many of your market share live in your market, and what are the channels that you're going to reach them. This is where all the business canvas comes in and is really, really important, because we're picking when we think we're going to get to break even and cash flow positive, so that we know how much of all these we have to have and where to go get the money. What y'all think? Clear? Because I just gave y'all accounting 210 in 50 minutes. and I didn't double entry bookkeep once. And that's really it. There you go. That's accounting 210 and 50 minutes. This is your story. And it's important that when you make your forecasts and your budgeting and what you want to do and how successful you want to be, that is you writing your story. Writing your story the way it can and should happen. So you write that story out and you do your research. Write a really, really truthful, good estimate of what your story should be. And then after you go into business, you start printing out these statements and you start reading them. And you read them and you compare them to your budget. What did you think you were going to do? Does it look like that? Am I really doing it? And then start comparing it to industry averages. Compare them to yourself. Am I doing better this year than I did last year? And if your story is not reading the way you want it to read, then you need to sit down and diagnose where you got off track so you can fix it. And there's lots of ways we could fix it, but that's another class. A whole nother class. I'll make sure I got everything. Working capital. Let me tell you one other thing real quick. Remember, working capital is the cash that we pay, that we have on hand to pay for our operating expenses. Working capital on hand is usually pretty equivalent to your cash on hand. So it's here. And I also told you that number and that number are the same. One of the things that you may see as an accounting formula is working capital is equal to current assets minus current liabilities. So you could add up all of your current assets, subtract your current liability, and that's a good estimation of how much cash you have on hand and what your working capital might be for that time. That's one thing I forgot to tell you. All right, guys, that's a lot. You got any questions? Are y'all glazed over completely? It's okay, Walker, you can say yes. I'm telling you, like, it is my least favorite.
I'm literally a public relations major, and I almost failed accounting 210 when I took it for my minor. That's why I'm in this class as well. So all of this stuff is just like Chinese to me.
I'm sorry. I hope it's a little bit easier to understand now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like, think about it this way, guys. You got 4 houses and people live in these houses. This is the house that everybody lives in before you open your business. That's the startup house. Your income statement house, you have your balance sheet house, and then you have your cash flow house. This one tells you, am I making money? This one tells you how much you're worth. And this one tells you how much money you have in your pocket. And that's what they tell you. So I need to make money to have cash in my pocket. More cash I have in my pocket, more money I can make. That's the truth. The more money I make, the more I'm worth. That sums it up. In a nutshell. Whew. Glad it's over. All right. I'll close up by saying this. You guys now have a really good basic understanding of how financial statements work. And one thing I want to say to you is, if you put yourself in the 10% of the population who can look at these and kind of understand, you don't have to be able to dig down into the details. You just need to kind of know how it works. Then you are going to have a better understanding of what's going to happen when we come out of this pandemic. And I want to give you this. Sun Tzu wrote a great book called The Art of War. It's probably 3,000 years old now. And he was one of the first people to ever write a book on strategy. And one of the tenets of being successful in that book that he talks about is, if you want to be successful, you need to eliminate surprise. Eliminate the element of surprise. And surprise comes when you don't know something. So what he's saying is you need to eliminate uncertainty. 90% of the population cannot eliminate the uncertainty that is associated with financial statements. And that means that 90% of the population, let me say this, if I can make that bigger, do not understand that sales in a store does not equal cash in their pocket. It doesn't. And 90% of the population is going to expect our economy to open up and act just like normal. But just looking at this one chart, you know now that our economy is not going to look like that when it opens back up. It's going to be a shit show, y'all. And the reason it's going to be tough is because for 2 months now, sales have been zero for a lot of stores, low or zero. And if sales for these 2 months are zero or very low, what's going to be the cash on hand in those months? Zero. And if they don't have cash on hand, they have no working capital. They can't bring employees back and pay them. They can't buy inventory. There's lots of things that they can't do. Business owners are going to have to start very small. They're not going to just walk back in their store and things operate the way they were prior to the economy closing down. Now, that's neither good nor bad. It just is what it is. That's the way it's going to work, and you now know that. And if that's the case, then it's up to you to write your story and how you're going to respond to this. Because the job market for anybody graduating right now is abysmal. And the reason it's abysmal is because the companies that you're going to go to work for no longer have the cash to pay you. And I can't tell you how many students I've had come to me already and say their internships and their jobs have been rescinded. And it sucks. But this is real. And if you understand financial statements, you know, it has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with, like, they don't have the money to pay you. So rewrite your story. Go to grad school. Do something else in the meantime until cash reserves, you know, are better. And I can say this, if you're graduating right now, it sucks to go into a job market where unemployment rates are hitting depression levels. We're almost at the level of unemployment we were at in the Depression back in 1920s. That sucks. But when it's that low, you got nowhere to go but up. Nowhere to go but up. So that kind of rocks for you. Kind of rocks. But just think about it. As you hear things, think. That's all I ask you to do. Just think. Okay, test on Tuesday. Blackboard like usual. I'll send you an email with your password and everything. I will convert this Zoom video over and put it on the website as well as the whiteboard. I'll save it and post it up there for you. And you've got your PowerPoints, and I will put a test review from my summary of the chapters up on there as well. If y'all need anything this weekend, y'all email me. And y'all just go think about this, because I know it just made you so happy. You're like, oh my God, I can't wait to get out of class so I can go look at this stuff again, because this is so fun. I know. Y'all just let me know if you need anything, okay? And with that, let me see. Y'all have the best weekend ever.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
You're so
Thank you.
welcome.
Have a good one.
Bye, y'all too.
Thanks.
Thanks. See ya.
Do you mind staying in for just a second while I ask
Sure.
a question?
Okay.
Hold on one second.
Yeah. No problem.
Do you mind stop recording? It's just
You're
just
right.